So, let me tell you kids just how good you have it these days. With your base attack bonuses and simple addition and combat rounds that didn't take half an hour and consulting half a dozen charts. Let me tell you about THAC0, or THAC0, or even THAC0 as one of my cousins pronounced it. THAC0. Two-hit AC 0. A game mechanic so poorly conceived that it's an anagram that contains a second anagram. A mechanic that was already overly cumbersome and outdated even at its inception. A relic that somehow took decades to finally be mercifully put down. For context, it's important to remember that D&D got its start as a war game. Chainmail. Rules for medieval miniatures. This becomes obvious when we break down THAC0, two-hit AC 0, AC standing for armor class. What class of armor do you have? This is not how one describes what a character is wearing. This is how one classifies a military unit. It sounds more at home when talking about a tank, not an elf. So when we picture the birth of D&D, it's important to remember that this is where it came from. Gary Gygax and his nerd friends sitting around a table covered in minis and charts and maps and protractors. These are the kind of gamers that delighted in calculating every variable they could and incorporating those into the rules. They were not concerned with not bogging down play with endless modifiers and charts. To the contrary, that was likely a big draw of the game for many of them. They craved the number crunching. But enough of why THAC0 was a thing. What was THAC0? How did you calculate it, and how do you use it to determine if an attack is successful or not? So as the name would imply, two-hit armor class 0 is the number one would have to meet or exceed on a 20-sided die in order to hit a target with an armor class of 0. As a side note, it's long been a pet peeve of mine that someone refers to a single die as a dice. Dice is the plural, so the only time I want to hear the phrase a dice is in the context of a cooking video. What kind of a cut is that? A dice. Back to the topic at hand. To hit AC 0 sounds simple enough, but it's anything but. First, to find what your THAC0 was, you needed to consult a chart and find your character class and level. Now, for a fighter class, this was fairly simple. A level 1 fighter had a THAC0 of 20, and that would go down for 1 for each level. A level 10 fighter would therefore have a THAC0 of 10, meaning they needed to roll a 10 or higher on a d20 to hit someone with an armor class of 0. A rogue class would see their THAC0 going down at half that speed, 1 every 2 levels. A wizard, even slower at 1 every 3. And then, in a decision that boggles the mind, though, was the choice to make priest classes advance at a rate of 2 points for every 3rd level. This meant that priests would lag behind, say, a rogue until level 4, then jump ahead 2 points, going from 20 to 18, before allowing the rogue to once again catch up until level 7, when the priest THAC0 would drop to 16, and well, you can see how silly this already was. So this is all fine and confusing enough, but what happens then if your target isn't polite enough to have exactly 0 as their armor class? Well, they decided an untrained person with a THAC0 of 20 would have about a 50-50 chance of hitting an unarmored person. This makes enough sense, but for reasons that no one seems to understand, they decided a higher armor class was worse than a lower one, with a 10 armor class being the worst and a lower number getting better. So, that would do what one would do is take their THAC0 and subtract the target's armor class to get the number they needed to hit. Yes, subtract. Why not simply make a higher AC better, as would be common sense, and add the AC? No one knows. And yes, this meant if a target had a good enough armor class, it would go into the negatives, thus making you subtract a negative number in this equation. And all of this, of course, hasn't even brought us to the various modifiers to your attacks, such as ability modifiers, size modifiers, your proficiency with your weapon, the quality of your weapon, and whatever else you and the DM could be bothered to remember at the time. Needless to say, all of this meant any momentum in the game would grind to a halt the moment combat began. It was not unusual for a single round of combat to take 20 minutes or longer, and an entire fight to take an hour or more. If you were the DM, well, good luck holding everyone's attention the entire time. And as a player, back before the era of smartphones, you got quite good at stacking your dice, waiting for your turn. At the very least, it gave you a good chance to hit the bathroom, run out for pizza, or maybe try convincing everyone to just play Shadowrun instead.